Nasser Mashni, thank you for joining us again on the shot.
Pleasure to be here, David.
I've heard you speak at I don't know how many rallies over the last 2 years. I'm just going to go with countless. And not once have I heard you say that you want Palestine to be recognized by nations helping to bomb the shit out of it. What is your reaction to the Prime Minister's comments this week?
You're 100% right. Not once in my life have I ever spoken at a rally to say recognize Palestine. So I've spent 50 years, I don't know, at rallies or longer, David. Never before have we screamed for recognition now, recognition now. But if you have a look around the West, whether it's Macron's call or Keir Starmer, Canada, New Zealand, and now obviously Australia, planning to recognize Palestine, the absurdity that they think that the movement, that the protests, that the petitioners, that the concerns that sit within their constituencies are going to be placated by some sort of recognition. And Palestinians, Palestine exists. We don't need some piece of paper. We don't need the United Nations, which is, bears the responsibility for the ills that have befallen the Palestinian people. We don't need their recognition. We are who we are. Our existence is our who we are is our own recognition internally. Um, the what's particularly egregious, like Australia, and we're talking in the Australian context, in a context, is that we continue to supply Israel with the impunity that it enjoys to allow it to do this stuff, whilst recognizing at some point down the line down there. The fact that we're still part of the F-35s program, the fact that we continue to trade with Albert, the fact that the Future Fund is has investments in, that our superannuation funds all continue to invest in and profit from companies that United Nations found complicit in the oppression and occupation of the Palestinian people is just absurd. And then when you overlay that with the robustness, the expeditiousness um, uh, of Australia's response to Russia once they invaded the Ukraine. You see this duplicity, hypocrisy, outrageous, different treatment. And that's something that we should be ashamed of as a country. And I think, when leaders think about their legacies, standing up and doing the right thing might not always be the easiest thing. Might be hard, but it's never the wrong thing. And sadly, that level of leadership has our Prime Minister's fallen short on that level.
To put the most cynical read on things, because I guess that's what I do, it feels like recognition of Palestine is a bit of a pressure valve against the growing discontent of ordinary people that allows the can to be kicked further down the road while people in Gaza continue to be starved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is. I mean, there is just no other way, no other way to, I mean, there's no other way to couch it in any other terms. It is just absolutely, this will be enough for them. And, it might have been the case 3 or 4 years ago, and it would have quelled that space. And it might have worked in November of 23. It would have been, you know, wow, Australia's done something against the grain. But, recognition, 147 countries recognize Palestine today. It hasn't stopped Israel from murdering, killing, raping, destroying, ecocide, scholasticide, genocide. These words that we never even knew the meanings to, never even knew how they applied to human beings. I mean, an entirely new vocabulary has been added to the Australian vernacular. And, we saw that in a volcano sense. We saw that what happened on the Harbour Bridge a couple of weeks ago. And to think that we're all going to quietly go back into our boxes now, because at some point in the future, Australia's going to recognize Palestine. And I mean, this is one of the absurd things. We've seen what Israel does, that they're going to be okay, that they demand that we be demilitarized. You wouldn't. you couldn't expect Palestinians to have a state that was contingent upon Israel being armed and the Palestinians. I mean, what sort of state doesn't have the ability to defend itself? Even Germany and Japan, post World War II, and the reconstructions were, their constitutions were amended to ensure that they never had um, wars of external wars, that they didn't trigger any wars, but they were able to have defensive capabilities. I mean, it's just beyond absurd, David.
There's also a logical gap in sort of acknowledging the atrocities committed by Israel, but in the next breath insisting on condemning the resistance to the atrocities. That must be maddening as a Palestinian.
What's maddening is that, and particularly, if you have a look at the entire West, Keir Starmer doesn't have a record on Palestine. Macron doesn't have a record on Palestine. None of these blokes, and I mean, they're all blokes, has any quote unquote understanding of Palestine politics and any sort of DNA in Palestine. Elbow has his own kefir. Yeah. Elbow, like I don't have any video of him saying river to the sea, but he knows what it is and knows what Palestine is. And, I've fist bumped Elbow and, we've had a lot of time. I mean, he chaired the Parliamentary Friends of Palestine way back when. And, he knows. And he also knows that this is nothing. And Palestinians aren't going to wait for recognition like it's not some sort of a bargaining chip. And it's, frankly, it's a way that these countries, the West, the global North, is trying to displace some of their guilt and complicity. And, you know, it's factual. We are complicit and we are guilty. And to sort of try and claim some moral authority. I mean, I heard Albo saying, if you don't believe in two states, then you don't believe in peace. And no, I mean, it's very clear. The Palestinian demands are very, very clear. Stop the genocide. Yeah, number one. Create some accountability. Number two. End the occupation. End apartheid. Apply international law. Allow Palestinians that want to go home, that have the keys to their home. I mean, this is one of the absurdities. Israel, every Jew can perform aliyah, return, but Palestinians, and this is 2,000-year-old supposed right to return, yeah, since the Jews were expelled, as if I don't have more DNA closer to those Jews that were expelled than, Benjamin Netanyahu. That right, that 2,000-year-old right to every Jew on earth is greater than my 77-year-old right. I mean, the absurdity um, uh, that people can just speak like that. And to get to this point where, countries want to claim that moral authority, or where Elbow says, if you don't believe in this and this is the pathway, that you're an enemy of peace or an enemy of humanity. No, no, we're very clear. Like, in my mind, tomorrow looks like a place where everyone lives there with equal rights, enshrined in a constitution, has a separation between churches, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, churches and
Plural.
state, plural, and that everyone is afforded the right to live freely and, celebrate or not celebrate, live, marry, etc. My dad's first girlfriend was a Jewish woman. He was a Muslim, married a Christian. Shit happens.
This week, a colleague in journalism, Anas al-Sharif, and his entire Al Jazeera team were assassinated by Israel. This is not unusual. Al Jazeera this week also published a list of more than 270 journalists murdered by Israel in Gaza. What was different this time, though, was they didn't bother pretending they weren't deliberately targeting a journalist. They announced it. My question, Nasser, is why does Israel feel such obvious impunity that it can announce its war crimes to the world?
Um, because they've been so blatant and they've got away with it. Way back when, I mean, no, it's, for many quote unquote new to the movement, October 8 advocates, if you will, they won't remember 21 and 18 and 14, but Israel's been doing this. They assassinated Shireen Abu Akleh, forensic architecture were able to reconstitute that crime scene and to pinpoint exactly where she was shot from, that she was in fact targeted by using their brilliant skills. And I mean, if nobody's ever seen the forensic architecture, just Google that stuff. They do brilliant work, not just in Palestine, but all over the place in creating state-based accountability for crimes against humanity. Um, they assassinated her. But the bombing of the Reuters building in 2018, because they said it was a Hamas terror center. But over years and years of just throwing out terrorists, when the four Abu Bakr boys, in 2014 were running across a beach, and they were deliberately targeted by a Israeli gunship. It's Palestinian kids that have been, you know, double tapped. They're shot twice in the head. This is they've got away with it, and all they do is say terrorist. If they're pulled up, they'll say something like, "We're investigating," and then there is never an investigation or any accountability. And so you go back to October 23. Aside from the lies, the beheaded babies and babies in ovens and baby cut out of a womb and systematic rapes that no mainstream journalist has apologized for. Biden hasn't said sorry that when he said he saw the pictures, didn't say sorry for that. Netanyahu never said sorry that he said it. Every newspaper editor and shock jock that punched it out there never said sorry. I was on an interview in an interview on 3AW. I'm pretty sure it was 3AW. And after I finished the interview, then, when I wasn't there, um, the the quote unquote journalist or the presenter said something beheaded babies, and I went straight back to the executive producer and said, no, they've already admitted that it's not true. The Israelis admitted it's not true, and then he added a correction. That and only because I was able to intercede immediately. So all of those things have happened, and they just say Hamas, terror tunnels, tunnels on hospitals. The very first hospital that got hit. There was, don't do that, you shouldn't do that. But that's all they copped. That was the outrage. And then they went, oh, we can go a little bit further. So they took out the entire hospital. Please don't do hospitals. Now there's not a hospital left. And then it was schools, and then it was hospitals, schools, and then mosques and churches. I mean, the third oldest church on earth, on earth. The old Pope was calling there every day. Israelis don't care because nobody's holding them to account. And so the last remaining journalist team in North Gaza, and remember that these, Palestinians, and we had the Guardian expose Microsoft's complicity in Unit 8200's um, uh, dastardly, sickeningly Orwellian control. So Palestinians don't have a telephone network. We rely on a telephone network that the Israelis control. So every phone call, don't worry about Signal or WhatsApp. Anytime you use a phone in in apartheid Israel-controlled historic Palestine, they record every single phone call, every single text message. And Microsoft had enabled a separate section of their cloud for this unit of Israeli intelligence to be able to keep 1 million phone calls an hour for up to a month, perhaps longer if they needed. The Israelis run AI over those conversations. And then from those conversations, determine targets that they put into unmanned drones. And these drones are flying around going, oh, there's David, bang, bang. Now, Anas and his colleagues had just filed a report. They went back to a tent because, they've been displaced how many times? And they know exactly where they are because, the ping of your mobile phone. And I don't imagine any of your listeners or watchers don't know this, but the reality that when somebody rings your phone, it's because of triangulation and all that sort of stuff. But Telstra, Optus, Vodafone know exactly where your phone is. So if you've got your phone and I'm in control of exactly where your phone is, I know exactly where your phone is because I own the telephony infrastructure, I can send a bomb straight to your phone. And so when he hangs up on his phone call with his wife, his children, his mother, Al Jazeera, They go boom and drop a guided missile straight onto it. And the absurdity. I mean, look, we had a protest on Monday night in front of the ABC. Is, journalists are culpable and responsible. The fact that, you know, they assassinated Anas, but then run articles that say um, Al Jazeera reporter killed. Yeah, wasn't assassinated, wasn't murdered. He was killed. And then, in the same byline, Israel claims he's a Hamas operative. I mean, even if he was a Hamas operative, eh, you just can't. This is just absurd. I'm not going to. I can't believe that, 22 months later, 670 odd days, the complete and utter devastation of a civilian captive population, 2+ million hostages, that, you know, journalists aren't saying things like challenging. They aren't, changing the byline. They're not putting a pre-nominal in front of Israel, genocidal Israel, apartheid, racist, genocidal Israel, indicted war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu, that we're affording space for these apologists for genocide, these Hasbarists. It beggars belief. And then, mainstream media uh, owners and stuff are going, we're not sure about the relevance of mainstream media, of print media, etc., legacy media. Well, it's because the humans have seen through your bullshit, seen that you're an instrument of the empire. Tell the truth. I mean, citizen journalism, whatever it might look like, somebody, today in Gaza, posting something on Instagram and it going viral, or, the first person at a car crash, or somebody, videotaping police brutality in a New York subway. People aren't buying that shit anymore. You can be relevant. Tell the truth.
You briefly mentioned Microsoft's complicity in the genocide in Gaza. Francesca Albanese's put together a very well-sourced report that basically has, works out at the core of all of this is neoliberal capitalism, is American imperialism, that basically what the horrors they are committing quite profitable for a very small number of people. What do we do about
Yeah, yeah.
this?
What do we do? We need to create accountability. The genocide, the Israeli economy forever has profited from the occupation, and they've been able to export that technology to despotic regimes, and we'll call them despotic because the West says they're despotic. Yeah, I mean, I don't not saying that they're not despotic, but I'm calling them despotic because we know that bucket, and we'll call that, Myanmar. Yeah, and we'll call that, uh, I don't know. I don't want to cast aspersions on a whole bunch of countries, but we know, quote unquote, what the West calls despots. And the West calls them and says, we're not them. But that same technology exists in our countries. They export this Pegasus software and all the crowd control, police training, weaponry. Where Albert Systems bid for a contract for the Royal Flying Doctor Service. I mean, the same company that is going to, we're spending 900 million plus dollars with to do something with our tanks. The same company that the Defense Force ended a contract with Albert because our tanks battle systems, I mean, as human beings, we don't really think about this stuff. But inside tanks is technology now so that they know where all the other tanks are so they don't shoot each other, but also mapping so they know where they all are on a map when they're trying to do tank stuff. And Albert, who supplied us the tank battle management systems, had a backdoor in there that allowed for all of our training and what we were doing as Australians with our tanks to go back to Israel. And we cancelled that contract about 4 or 5 years ago. But they're back selling us more tank shit. And that same Albert that wanted to look after and help our Royal Flying Doctor Service created the drone that assassinated Zombie Francois. And I mean, we've still had no justice for Zombie. And, people might forget. that she was in a convoy of three World Kitchen Aid cars. They were geolocated, geopinned. They were on a road that had been identified to the Israelis. They were in a convoy. They had done everything they needed to do. They were driving in three cars. A drone went over and took out the last one. The two cars stopped and got everybody into the other two. About 800 meters later, the drone came over and got the second car, came back, and all of them piled into the last car. And another kilometer later, right through the middle of the roof, killed everybody. Three flyovers. I mean, the drone's gone vroom, back, vroom. Three flyovers. Accidental, didn't mean it. Where's the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador? Where's the recalling of the Australian ambassador? Where's the sanctions on? Where's we're not doing anything else with Albert? So the Israeli economy has been underpinned by the technology, the crowd control, the facial recognition software, the corralling techniques, the way Palestinians have been treated and the way Israel oppresses us has been very, very lucrative for the Israeli economy. What's happened since the genocide started is, the ability, a completely new testing ground for F-35s, for the Apaches, for different types of bombs and targeting and systems, and all of the entities involved in that. I mean, the end munition isn't just manufactured by, Bob Industries. There's all sorts of other people involved in there. And when you go back, it ends up being, those that are most benefit from, the most sickening form of capitalism, predator capitalism that beyond identifying us as a cog in a wheel and a need for our increased productivity and paying us a dollar more than it would take for us to quit and a dollar less than absolute starvation. It just sees each of us as, ultimately cannon fodder if that will increase profits. And so there is an accountability, that must be had and must be sought. And that's on each of us as individuals to boycott those entities that we can to demand that entities that we might have some sort of purchasing power over, we might have proximity to acquisition departments or operations and say, don't buy that stuff. And then, get to the point where governments and institutions are sanctioning, and divesting from. I mean, the fact that the Future Fund uh, will record profits this year, but it's our sovereign wealth fund that we've made money out of the future funds shareholdings in companies that are committing a genocide is shameful. And I'm sure if we had the opportunity to ask every Australian, are they happy with the fact that we made an extra $1 billion, but it came at the expense of 20,000 dead children, hundreds of thousands of dead Palestinians, are the largest cohort of child amputations in history. If they're okay with that return on investment, ROI, your ROI has been great today, Aussies, and it's because we've managed to find our investment managers are scouring the earth looking for the best possible returns, and we've found that killing brown people using Israeli weapons makes good money. It's shameful. It's shameful and abhorrent.
Last 2 years, you've watched the same horrors I've watched, as has the Prime Minister, as has Penny Wong, as has Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and absolutely everybody has seen the same stuff, which I think tells us a lot about humanity and the ways in which we react to these sorts of things. We are seeing scenes like the Harbour Bridge a few weeks ago, but we are also seeing just detached, gross indifference to atrocity. How do you feel about humanity right now, Nasser?
Yeah, big question, David. Like it's hard not to feel absolutely betrayed. Yeah. So for these 2 years, I don't know. Well, I think, as Palestinians, we're just a little bit different. We're being betrayed by humanity, betrayed by brethren, betrayed by every system that is supposed to bring justice and equality to humanity. Predicated on a concept of never again meant never again for anyone, perhaps, Um, so we got breastfed a different sort of resilience, I think. That said, this past couple of years, and it ebbs and flows, and I've spent a lot of time in my study here, punching out stuff, whatever it might be, and doing whatever. But it ebbs and flows, and the the low points are perhaps like Christmas time, and stuff like that, where you can't help but be in proximity to shoppers and people going about their life as if everything's okay, and like you're living in a parallel universe, that the horrors you're seeing and the pain you're feeling and the exclusion from society and countrywomen, my community, um, uh, is soul destroying, because I've had friends, quote unquote friends, like, mate, you're here now, maybe leave that over there, and try and rest, try and get a break if you can, and um, and different layers of that conversation, and I'm like, my dad turned left. If my dad turned right, that's me. And I mean, you never get to meet me and you don't think, geez, Nasser's a good guy, tells a good story, fine, great to be around. Um, but you'd be okay with me dying. You'd be okay with me getting killed. My children, me running to these humanitarian foundation food points, with no water, with no guarantee that I was going to get food, and saying goodbye to my family before I left because I wasn't sure I was going to come back. You know, and seeing this, like the horror stories, kids, making wills, 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds making wills, and kids who say things like, "I hope I die. I'm sure there's food in heaven." Like, what sort of world are we living in that people are you know talking about the Easter Bunny, or Kris Kringle at work, or whatever it might be. Um, and but then at the same token, um, in like, if I leave the house, it's impossible that I don't get at least one thanks very much for your work, one fist bump, one human interaction, let alone if it's at an action. I mean, if it's at an action, I'm not Kim Kardashian, but I'm like one of her sisters that nobody knows her name. I'm a B grade brown famous, yeah. And there's a restoration in the fact that I'm not alone, that we're not alone, that whilst the government continues to exclude us and oppress us and despise us by, not speaking to us, not seeing us, not talking to us, that, a big chunk of Australia does. Big chunk of Australia does. And it's increasing. Um, so it's a sinusoidal graph, like the highs can be quite euphoric. I mean, I'll tell you, when I was texting with somebody who texted with somebody else, and then next thing I'm speaking to Julian Assange, and I'm going, you know, okay, this is what we'll do tomorrow. Meet me. Uh, and he had his hoodie on. I said, look, just have your back to everybody, just stand here. And I got, remember, and his wife was there and his kids, and I go, let's just keep you incognito for as long as we can, because he's got the Gandalf hair,
It's
And I went, just hang here, and I got this one of the security guards, and I grabbed him. I said, listen, stand here. He goes, oh, I said, listen, I'm telling you, stand here, look after this bloke. He goes, oh, okay, who's this? And I said, look, it's Julian Assange, but don't tell anyone. But we just got to keep him, quote unquote, under wraps for as long as possible, because once the media knows and the people know, he's going to get swamped. Anyway, so I go off to organize something, come back, and he's obviously got hot. I mean, it was pissing down. He's taken off his hoodie. Well, I come over, I said, we had a plan. Julian, we had a plan. You were going to keep the hoodie on. He goes, I just got hot. And I said, well, if you want to audition to be Gandalf in the next Lord of the Rings, and because, within seconds, we were
yeah.
swamped. And I mean, he's an Australian hero and he should be swamped. And, many people don't know, but, he spent the best part of, or more than 10 hours in the car to and from to be at that rally. And no little impost on him and his young family, his wife and his children. Um, but, how do you not get inspired by a guy who, paid all but the ultimate price, all but the ultimate price for humanity? And, as a human being, what he exposed in Iraq, what he's exposed through WikiLeaks, what empire his colleagues in the media did to him, you know, it just beggars belief. Ecuadorian embassy, jail, all of that grief, pain, and suffering for humanity. Didn't make any money. Didn't end up on, he's not doing a speaking tour and getting paid and fed, for humanity. And, you know, is purposefully, deliberately trying to reconstruct his own life, reconnect with his children, you know, to spend 5 and a bit hours in a car to drive down in driving rain to stand with us. How can you not have hope? And, without hope, I mean, the Palestinians, I said this to one of my friends, I said, one day we're going to be free. And when we're free, we'll cure cancer, we will cure all of the world's ills. The amount of brilliance within the Palestinian people and Palestine, when released from the obligation of having to survive, having to be steadfast, having to be resilient, when we can use all of our powers for good, that world is going to be amazing.
Amen. And then we'll be able to use some of our powers not to be obliged to be oppressors. We could contribute to some more good too, I think. Nasser, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure and it's always appreciated.
Much love to you, brother. Thank you so much, David.
Cheers, mate.